and tries to colonize North Africa, tries to colonize Tunisia. So they had to take back Tunisia from Catholic Spain. So for this reason, you'll find, even today, just a sliver of people that will not only know Italian, but some of them will know Spanish for some reason. Because that indelible imprint that was put by the devastation caused when they came in was just, it was felt on a deep level, on a very, very deep level. After him, the oath of allegiance was given to the 12th Ottoman Khalifa, Murad III. Murad III was the father of the sultans in the same way that Abdul Malik ibn Marwan was the father of the kings. All Ottoman rulers after him were the product of Murad III and his wife Sophia. Now this is important. Any Khalifas that came after him were somehow related to Murad III, just as Abdul Malik ibn Marwan, the famous Khalifa who said, when you find a man who disagrees with my rule, make his head agree with my sword. This Abdul Malik ibn Marwan, every single Umayyad ruler after was related to him. All of the ones in Andalus that built up Andalus are from his progeny. So that's why he's called Abul Muluk, the father of the kings. Well, Murad III was called the same thing, the father of the Abu Salatin, the father of the sultans. Because every single Khalifa, up until the abolishment of it, was from his lineage. In 985 AH came aerial disturbances, and historians such as Ibn Imad and Jalaluddin al-Suyuti only noted them without a full understanding of what they were in reality. Again, whether we're calling them aerial disturbances or unidentified flying objects or what have you, there were these aerial disturbances. Now, there were some deaths during this time. One of them was Burhanuddin Ibrahim ibn Bakhsha, who was a Hanafi scholar who wrote numerous texts against homosexuality, hashish, speakeasies, and other evils in his time. He died in the year 966 AH. Ahmed ibn Hamid, who was a Hanafi judge in Halab. Muslihuddin al-Multawi, a Shafi'i judge in Malta. Shamsuddin ibn Durum, Hanafi scholar in Halab. Both of these ulama died in 968 AH. Burhanuddin ibn Muflih, Muslahuddin Basruri, who was a Hanafi judge from Kalibuli. Both died in 969 AH. Then there was Zainuddin ibn Nujaym, who was a Hanafi judge that died in 97 AH. You had Shihabuddin al-Ramli, the Shafi'i judge and student of Imam Zakaria. Radiyuddin ibn al-Hanbali, the historian and mathematician of Halab. Both of these died in 971 AH. Now, by this time, the Muslims were noting down history. They'd already been noting down history, but they also began to write about their own contemporary times. By Ibn Khaldun's time, and this may be an important point for some, by Ibn Khaldun's time, writing down history for Muslims was normal. The difference is Ibn Khaldun was the first to systematize it in a way in which we now look at it. When I told this to a professor in this country, he almost fell off of his chair. So to finish it, I brought in Ibn Khaldun's Muqaddimah and read to him from Arabic and translated, so that way he could actually hear for himself that while his progenitors were eating raw flesh or looking at the fire and trying to figure out what it was, or cave painting or whatever it is they were doing, history was a well-known science to the Muslims. And it's something that we can't have that lost on us. This to them is progress. The way that things are for these people that have built this up, this to them is progress. For us, this is decline. The Ottomans that had all these things, they were actually in decline. This to them is the pinnacle. For us, it's things are headed down now. And it makes you understand how we read history. and how we understand the unfolding of history. Because of the social Darwinist construct, they understand that things can only get better. The inexorable march of progress. Things can only get better. We're getting better. We're getting more complex. We're getting more noble. Whereas how the Muslim sees it is civilization was already at its pinnacle. And when idolatry came into the world, we started to enter into a slow decline, which every now and then would hit a plateau, but it would go in a stair-step pattern. That is totally different and affects how you view the world and how you do things. Further to this, other deaths during this time were As-Sayyid al-Sharif Abdul Rahman al-Bayruti, the Shafi'i judge and an immigrant to Damascus. He died in 972 AH. Ahmed ibn Alawi ibn Muhammad ibn Ali ibn Jahdab ibn Abdul Rahman ibn Muhammad ibn Abdullah ibn Alawi ibn Ba'alawi al-Yamani, the great Shafi'i saint of Yemen, died in 973 AH. And with this last name, Ba'alawi, he was obviously a patron saint of what we're calling the Ba'alawi Tariqah. Yemen has produced innumerable saints, from Uwais al-Qarni all the way till now. It is one of the amazing things that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has chosen that area, which is so desolate and so harsh in its climate, to produce some of the most good-natured and upright people. For some reason, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has just chosen it that way. We also have other ulama. Taqiyuddin Muhammad ibn Shihabuddin al-Futuhi, Hanbali judge in Egypt. He died in 979 AH. He wrote numerous documents in history, fiqh, and also helped to systematize the administration of Egypt, which we would later find out had been broken into Egypt and Sudan. During this time, there was just Bilad Masr. That's all there was, the land of Egypt. There were no Sudanese. There were no Sudanese nationalists. There was no Wafd party. There was just one Egypt. Now, Bilad Sudan was used to refer to South Egypt. So Sa'id Masr was referring to Upper Egypt, which was Aswan all the way down into Sudan. And Lower Egypt was referring to Aswan and up. You'll find many great ulama coming from Sa'id Masr. You have Imams like Sheikh Umar Abdul Rahman, Abu Ja'far Al-Tahawi. So many scholars coming from Sa'id Masr. Again, an area of mainly Bedouin encampments, quite desolate. But you look at Imam Abu Ja'far Al-Tahawi, you look at all these different scholars that have been produced, and you can see that Allah has blessed them. Another was Abdullah ibn Sa'aduddin as-Sindi in 984 AH. Jamaluddin Muhammad Tahir al-Hindi, Hanafi chief of Hadith scholars in his time in 986 AH. Now, during this time, when you wanted to study Hadith, if you were a Hanafi in Central Asia, you made the trek to Sind. Sind is where the Hadith scholars were. Sind is where the experts in the madhab were, with the exception of Istanbul. That's where you travel to. So you find a lot of ulama having this name, Hindi, Sindhi. The Sindhis were known for their knowledge of Hadith. It sounds almost, the room would almost fall into laughter if you suggested this now. But back then, Sindhis were known for their knowledge of Hadith. They were considered to have remarkable memories. They had amazing feats of memory where they would memorize several pages of a book by just glancing and flicking the pages and writing it down. And they would be right. So a lot of the scholars, again, we're going back to this Central Asian link. These Central Asian scholars of the Hanafi school left behind a huge legacy. We could not speak about history without later on mentioning Muhammad Hayat as-Sindi. He was one of the greatest Hanafi scholars that ever lived in recent history. A Sindhi. So many other ulama from Sindh. And it's your history. It's my history. It's our history. It's not just that the scholars were great in the Arab world. Central Asia was a major hub. And that's something to be proud of. Because this ummah is great all around. Now, in 989AH, we had the beginnings of the Atlantic slave trade, which would bring about the first global permanent race-based slavery. Now, this is important. There are numerous books dedicated to this topic that have been written by the black intelligentsia. The greatest living voice of the black intelligentsia and black intellectualism today is a man by the name of Michael Dyson. Anytime I have watched him speak, anytime I have seen him in any live discussion, he has metaphorically decapitated anyone that's spoken against him. He is one of the greatest voices of the black intelligentsia. He's written numerous books on some of the impact of the Atlantic slave trade. And he's also written books on the aftermath of it. Now, what is the Atlantic slave trade? Before we can discuss the Atlantic slave trade, because we have to talk about this, because 100 million people being enslaved or disappearing, that's a big number. If 1/3 of America was just wiped out, water supply got poisoned, nuclear bomb was dropped, some other providential incident occurred, that would be a massive news event. More than the 11th of September 2001 attacks. 100 million is a big number. But we must talk about the different types of slavery. There are 3 forms of slavery. 3 general forms of slavery. All other forms of slavery devolve from these. There are 3 forms of slavery. The first form is war slavery. POW. People are taken in battle, and they are either killed, ransomed, or taken into the population of the people that have defeated them in combat. This is war slavery. The second type of slavery is indentured slavery. It was often called serfdom. Someone owes you a large amount of money, and you tell them that they have to work it off. And every time they get close to clearing the debt, you mention that they haven't cleared the interest. And when they clear the interest, you say there's still something more left of the debt. Or when they're close to clearing the debt, you can see they're in trouble, and you tell them, I'll give you another loan for only 4 more years or 5 more years. And you wind up in a permanent form of indentured slavery. When you die, your debts obviously don't go with you. Your children inherit it, and their children. So you have whole families from their father getting into debt, women being in debt, children being in debt, slaves. The third form is what is known as race-based slavery, where you will enslave others because of a perceived inferiority within them. This may be their socioeconomic status. Their race is usually a clear marker because it's the easiest, it's the most distinguishable characteristic. But sometimes class is used. Sometimes the way that they speak the same language, what accent they use. So if someone were to resort to slavery and say, everyone that speaks English with a Yorkshire accent.